Okay, welcome, guys, gals, ladies, gentlemen of the jury, unfortunately. Or fortunately, if you guys want to be considerate jury. Anyway, besides the point. So I was thinking, this Wanda Fuca plate, yesterday maybe I can go back a little bit. Also, before I jump forward, before I talk about that, maybe I'll just interject what I was talking about to mention this. Australia, world's largest chain of dormant supervolcanoes, and they're basically related to these currents flowing because there's a current coming across this way and there's a current coming across this way. So they begin to just cross one another here in a way where there's become eddies sufficient to produce volcanoes and eddies of magnitudes due to the magnitudes of the currents sufficient to produce supervolcanoes. Okay, so these things seem to have formed recently. So it's almost like the currents weren't initially crossing, like the current coming in up here more so went in this way through between Papua New Guinea, Australia, and just all of the broken apart parts. Like the current went into and just broke them all apart there and kind of just formed a sea of them. With many like island chunks of continental shelf flow that it just moved around, but like once Australia actually broke free, maybe the current was able to actually enter in to cross the other current. Like initially it wasn't. And so then it led to that like row of super volcanoes there. It looks like we can kind of see the rings of them, perhaps. Like here's one. Here's an eddy. Like there's eddies here for sure that were in this general region. There, that one at least. It looks like several. There's something. Here's one even. Whether or not we've located them all is unclear, but looks like there's a string there. Okay, back to what I was talking about. I was thinking I would like to, before I go recording, because I really feel like I kind of got slowed down by the fact that I needed to kind of look into the topics I was finding were relevant to what I was talking about. So yesterday I've been going into this mouse. I've been going into how a current is coming across here when the Earth was expanding. A current from... So just to go back to fully complete the circuit of the current is a vortex storm was here because ancient Dwarka was attacked by a vortex weapon, and it then punctured the mantle, physically causing space itself, ethereal, subtle particles like sand, but much more subtle, like compared to Earth, like a sand grain in like the equivalent, like instead of Earth, like a pile of sand, but in the same way, instead of an atom, a pile of sand, of ether particles, relatively just subtler particles that then entered into the earth and it displaced mantle, and mantle began to outflow from the hole that was punctured in the earth. Okay, and that then flowed and was moved by energies. So a current flowed, and like where the current didn't flow, like right here, because there's a current coming out across this way that then wraps around and around across under Europe and then goes into the northern Atlantic and down this way. So it begins to produce a pressure down here. So essentially it begins to cause shape to this layer where currents are flowing and where they're not flowing. And where they're not flowing, essentially the currents adjacent to those regions are pushing more and more material to essentially reach some equilibrium so that this process mostly stopped. Like, it's not really doing this anymore, although Juan de Fuca plate has some interesting motions. There's like 16 feet every 100 years. That's really fast. Like, that's a lot of motion. I can see why that's concerning, like, in some ways. Okay, so here's the mantle puncture hole, and current goes out in all directions, but it goes out this way, out across here under Europe, and then up into the North Arctic region that it physically starts to cause novas that open the space physically wider by these novas, just pushing the land masses apart and inserting continental or oceanic crust in its place and filling, like, increasing the radius of the Earth. But that current, oops, comes around this top, and some of it exits the top by going down this side. And when it goes down here, it begins to do things. And what I was talking about yesterday is this current comes down here, it keeps going straight, and it goes all the way through to here, where it then exits here as a flame basically under South America that spans out in this region and crosses it. But at some point, the Earth physically has the entire layer so filled that the internal pressure, instead of flowing through these regions, begins to flow just out of the fault lines between the continents. So if we look at the oceanic crustal age, essentially anything that's orange, red, yellow, like up to 66 million years, anything in this color range, the orange and red especially, some of the yellow is more yellow it is, more towards green, the little blue yellow combo strip there, the more towards there it is, the more it existed. But essentially none of the orange and red existed. This all happened after the Earth expanded. So this whole region was released by the Earth expansion process when the continents, the bonds between them broke, which is what Chicxulub actually was a bond breaking between the continents. Probably a bond between, because right now we see here is connected to South America, but this segment used to be. So it used to be that right here was here, and then the Yucatan Peninsula was also connected to South America. And in so being connected, it had a double bond, but the bond broke. So it was probably connected here, like at the top, like it folded in, and then it was connected. And that bond broke, but the other bond didn't break. But that was one of the bonds breaking. Also over here, the bond between South America and Africa at the same time that broke, causing the Nader crater the same time. It's not like 66 million years ago. Is just, let me just pull that up real quick for anyone who doesn't know. This was a recent discovery. Nader crater. Right here, the paper itself, it basically says, I could even, I'm sure, just put in Chicxulub, because they're not impact craters, they're bonds breaking when the Earth was expanding. Like when it rapidly expanded, it had a bunch of bonds break. Like if you have had a button-down shirt on and you just somehow ballooned by maybe, or whatever, like at some point the buttons are just gonna be like okay. Maybe it's just too tight and you like lean over, you know. like buttons will break or rip pants, you know, like that kind of thing. That kind of thing. That's what happened, was a sufficient stress was on the bonds that the bonds broke. Okay, so to get back to what I was talking about, when that happened, this stream was coming down this way initially, but then at 66 million years, the Earth began to physically expand, and that made the direction of the current, like because its momentum is straight, like it wants to go straight. And so as the Earth expands, the direction on the surface of the Earth that straight is not the same. It begins to, initially it was going down here, but it begins to go further over this way, because essentially that is the path that it is going straight along as the Earth expands. And as a result, it starts to cause a lot of, like, Yellowstone and all these novas. I talked about this yesterday. So there's a current coming also across this way and wrapping around and then wrapping back around and crossing the current and pushing into this side to extend it. Also, where they cross, they create eddies, which then create like these support structures underlying the cross to help make it like stable, because essentially as the current flows, it forms an overlayer and like pillars, support pillars of these eddies that go like from the bottom to the overlayer so that when the current stops flowing, like if it hasn't formed a sufficient structure, then the top just collapses inward and it's not actually above the ocean, so it's below sea level, which is why, like, over here this was a failed continent formation that was forming when Australia, which was here, began to have space between the current's exit point under Mexico into Australia. Initially, it was adjacent, but it began to separate distance and like physically be at a distance, but it was still bonded. Like we can even see these little tabs, like with little nodes in them. It really is like a tab that then has like a pin to hold it in. So when the pin breaks, it like blows the pin is like Chicxulub. It was a pin blowing essentially of one of these structures kind of things. But Australia was connected, but then it began to have space between it, still bonded enough to not be just like shot off until it was shot off. And in the intermediary time, it was filling that space with just like compacted enough material that it began to form a actual overlaying surface, but then that it just didn't make it. Like some of it maybe, I'm not sure if this was formed also. And it's just like once the currents, because also this current coming into Australia over here also went through this region, I think it just collapsed it. It just wasn't stable enough. Whereas over here, it generally was stable enough. So we have a accreted continental shelf here. Whereas like right here, where the main current's coming down this way, and we can even see its boundaries because the current is like a tube. It's more like this. Where is it? It's more like this. The current is like that. So that's on the very side of the current, it has a depression physically formed in the land where we just see it's just not as supported in this region as it is between the current, where this side's a little less distinguishable, but it's still visible, especially here. These two sides of this current flow in down this channel, but along the sides, it's just rounded because essentially it is a current, like a lava tube, like a lava tube. It's really like this pretty much, just in like great scales. Like that's probably a good picture even right there. Like it forms a physical overlayer that if it's supportive enough, it stays as, and like birds chirping on it, do do do, tweet tweet tweet. You know, everything's cool. But if it like doesn't have enough support structure pillars underlying, then it starts to like collapse in more depending on the circumstances. So, okay, okay. Now with that, like a little bit of setup to this all, I guess, is what I'm gonna say. I was talking about how the current not only went down this main channel, but it also crossed over and bowed out this region. But in so doing, it deflected off of it and crossed again over here and just bowed out this region, like right here. So we can even see the secondary currents, like boundaries, is certainly like, it must be like this way. Maybe it's there. I was thinking it came in this way and just deflected off, but it doesn't really. Like this is a little tricky to make. It would almost seem like it would have to make more outward like that, but it's much more rounded, and then it does look like there is a extension of this that kind of follows right here or here. This one is, I don't know. All right. But so what I was talking about yesterday, and regardless of exactly how the currents do this, the current is crossing over because of generally being over this way and crossing over. And like this is for certain causing crossover within the currents if we look over here, because there's an actual opening here, so the currents were just reaching over that far. And maybe it's not as I interpret it, because it like this kind of looks like it blocked off whatever's going on to some degree, where maybe like a lot of major events happen in this region after the earth started to expand, so like it just hides a lot of the details of what exactly was going on. But in essence, the current was cutting across and coming back, creating an extension out. So this current coming into Australia from under North America ran into it, went either between Australia and Papua New Guinea and just started to disintegrate all the chunks, continental shelf chunks. It was all one single landmass, but when it reached there, those chunks got broken into little pieces because one of the currents was just cutting across here, but it deflected off of it, so it's cutting across between them here, but it's deflecting off above them as well. So it's running up along the coastline, creating this boundary. So there's that current coming down and a current going up. So between them, just like if we look at the motions even of these plates, like the inner side is going southward because the current was going this way, and the outer side is going northward because the current is going this way. So there's two currents that were flowing, and I guess still are to like a detectable degree. It's really nothing like it was because it's mostly stop doing it, but it's because it's so late in the process, like it's only really been thousands of years. It's still doing some of the things that seem to be detectable here with the Juan de Fuca plate. But so this current cuts across and overlays it though. Instead of just being adjacent, it pushes into it and overwhelms it. So it like overlays the oceanic crust. But so this current is essentially where experiencing stresses from this overlaying mass, which begins to like cause physical fractures because it wasn't formed stably yet. It was still like somewhat molten and able to be fractured, or it just simply was too much mass on top, regardless of if it was solidified yet or not. It might have been solid enough to just physically fracture in a way that's just creates this region. So it's not like extending. It in no way is related to the Rockies as it's described. Like people suggest that it physically is all the way into all the way over here, it seems. Not true, because that's really caused by this current that was coming southward this way. So it's got really nothing to do with the Juan de Fuca plate, which is this current. Nothing to do with it. But there may be, I was realizing, because this is a current flowing, it was flowing, and then there's this overlying thing, but there's a current that kind of flows under. It may have had some, like, penetrating, like, down under the continental crust, like, sloping down kind of things, currents flow, where some portions are detectable inward, and maybe even like especially with, where is it? I think it's just on the Juan de Fuca. Wikipedia, I think this has it. That image. No. No, it was It was the Farallon plate. It was the Farallon plate. This one. So I realized this is way down here. At the very, here's South America. This structure is like at the boundary down here. For sure there is a Nova Center here relating to the crossing of this current with this current that really produced a Nova Center here that protruded outward. I don't know why it would be not like that if it's related to that. So I was thinking, because it looks this looks significantly more like actually up here, like just this, where like a lot of energy was flowing here, like this stretch. And it just made me wonder if like there's like because in essence, let me go to Mount Grenard. This outer ring of granifier, where the mountain itself is made of basalt with a hexagon of basalt with an inner hexagon of olivine gabbro with no basalt there. And then the inner mountain itself is made of monzonite diorite. And then it has a ring of basalt, but not all basalt. It's just a ring of basalt here, and then a ring of granifier. So all these differences where there's this center thing with a extended ring segment that made me kind of think like, could it be that like this has some like ring structure under in the mantle itself that physically is all the way like this, like really way bigger, to the point where it really is like almost all of North America, but it extends from this like nova center through downward in this direction to like go down all the way here. I don't know, it's just a thought I'm having that it seems plausible enough to mention right now. That it maybe just had something of that nature for this like concept of what the Farallon plate might remnants might be, because essentially if was a Farallon plate that has evidence of that nature, then it is a current that was flowing. And my thoughts are, what if this current that goes out this way and goes up this way energetically interacts with this system up here but underneath the ground by like going under the moho. Like this energy flows down into the moho and just creates a physical current of like a negative to the positive to create a balance like across the layers of the earth in a way that's detectable, because this is very odd. What is this? It even energetically connects to Flemish Cap, which I believe to be Atlantis. I've said it enough. I'll say it again. That's my best guess at this point. With all the things I've heard, I haven't fully inspected Azores Plateau, so I can acknowledge that's a possibility, but really, because the current went right across here, essentially it suggested that ancient Atlantis was sunk because various reasons, and so if this vortex caused a energetic storm to propagate energy in a wave this way, knowingly, like they attacked Dwarka, maybe I feel like all of this was understood. Like everyone knew if like the gods started to fuck the humans, it was done. And everyone knew it, and everyone knew this is what would happen, so they knew that when Dwarka was attacked, it would cause a current flowing like this that would sweep out into Atlantis. Not just Dwarka, but Atlantis would be like focused by this. And it did, and it was here though. Right? Yeah. Where is Flemish Cap? I don't know if I'm in the right location. It's kind of, I don't know if it's on this map. In terms of if they have an outline for it. It's definitely like here. It just got pooped on and sunk. It's an island that pre-existed continental shelf, Precambrian. Important because Precambrian is before the Earth was attacked by a vortex weapon and caused to expand. Precambrian is important in that way. Exactly that way. So that there's a continental shelf island here that was attacked by a vortex weapon, causing a current to flow into it. It makes it highly likely that if there was an Atlantis, it was right there. And based on everything, it was right there. And so it's really interesting that this Juan de Fuca energetically, or the Farallon current, which also maybe because of its position here, instead of like flowing this way underneath, or maybe it did both. Like it went underneath, but then it also went to this direction. So it like I was gonna say this, but I stopped myself. Is it runs into Australia, goes up this way, and maybe goes under here, but maybe it also goes under this way, like down, and cuts directly into this, starting to cause this stretch. Like just past the edge of the continental shelf. It just, because there's no, it's basically an open space, so it's not like it's going underneath anything. It just flows out into the open space, flows along the continental shelf, and then energetically begins to go downward because it hits resistance enough going forward that it starts to go up and down, but down, and it goes down enough apparently that it physically goes under the continental shelf and begins to flow back into the mantle itself, and mix with it in a way where we see this like structure that energetically was being caused to interact with this structure up here, because this was a nova center. There was a lot of things going on here that almost guaranteed energetically bonded or interacted with this current flow to stabilize everything. So why it reached over and boop touched Flemish Cap, I do not know, but it I feel pretty good about that. Okay, back to the Juan de Fuca plate. I was reading. Where was I? Oh, yeah. Okay, this said Laramie. I was trying to read some technical papers to get a better grasp on what. There it is. Why did that not? What exactly? For now, we can say that the Juan de Fuca plate is a shrinking remnant of the Farallon plate, which was introduced as the Paleo-Pacific plates that underthrust the Cordillera. What does that have? And then sank. Pacific Ocean. Washington. So this is along this stretch up here where a current for sure is flowing this way and crossing over like that. Okay, so with that in mind, this must just be that stretch that protrudes outward here. Having like upward energies and then sideways and then down. It's a little surprising these don't have more that way kind of arrows, honestly. There is one there. I'm not sure what I'm even looking at. Ice sheet 17,000 years ago. So this is just how the ice sheets flow. So the ice sheets probably would resemble the overall current that the current took, because essentially where there was more current flowing, it just produces more of an indentation. So subsequent current preferentially follows the indentations. So we can kind of anticipate this to follow the general current trends. I mean, Does look like it's generally doing it, although around the coast it's a little anomalous, but that makes sense. It's just kind of sinking towards the coast. Also, this is where the land itself is significantly lower. So certainly it's just elevation wise. This does have more of like it almost resembles the tube. Like on this side of the tube, it prefers to go over here. On this side of the tube, it prefers to go to the coastline. With down the middle having more of a down the middle current, even really does resemble the tube with those aspects of it. But certainly not. Maybe, let me think about this. Maybe it is related to an undercurrent, like going back to this. This. Like maybe this current goes under and does really reach down to that. I just don't know what the map looks like except for what it's showing here. Yeah. Yeah, because they say the Farallon plate was this big, like that's probably a useful thing to look at. Is the current was coming out here, running into Australia, going up the coastline, creating this plate basically. But instead of it creating it out here, it just created it already where we see it today. It really didn't create like this didn't happen. It really was. It essentially, the current came out, ran into resistance, and branched off. But it branched off also in two directions, and then it reconvened with itself like around. So it because it's flowing underneath. It basically gets under the crust, the continental crust, and flows in the mantle, because the continental crust is just like an ice cube floating on the mantle at that point until it freezes around it. A very cold ice cube, like it stays cold enough that it never really like melts into anything but what we see. But generally speaking, it's like an ice cube that's is floating on stably on top of a molten liquid of magma. And so when that magma flowed out like this way between the cracks and came across this way, it was really just going between them and probably under them as well, but also over the top of them. Like it flowed up in this region as the Central Atlantic Magmatic Province. And because of the proximity as well as just this current flowing, but then it reaches this point where I guess there's just enough energy that it's able to downward project underneath the crust because it bubbled up to the surface here in a way. So it was really at the surface, but then because there's this expansion going on, it's essentially able to more freely move and just flow into this region, and it begins to balloon this whole region. It actually like balloons over here. It's maybe like this, like it comes around this way, and like, but when it's coming around this way is actually right like here, and it begins to just balloon this region. So the front currents kind of spiral into this like oldest oceanic crust, but then it just fills that region until the bonds break, and then the Earth starts to rapidly expand, creating the orange and yellow and red of the entire Pacific. So like all of this was actually right here with this current just kind of flowing up this way and creating an opening here, and also apparently going under North America, and in a way where it also went to the right underneath North America again, or down to the south, I guess, under North America, because it was really flowing in here, across here into the heart of Africa, where it was just severing the heart of Africa into, because it was expanding to a new radius. So this current flowed this way and this and through the actual boundary, so like within the continent, through the boundary into right here, where it then fans out. It cuts across into Africa at like specific joints, especially here though, where the flame, like, essentially it preferentially it just goes as far as it can across until it cannot go any further, and then this point really has the most current flowing through it, and that flows right into this region. Although maybe it wasn't hard, it just created this in some way, I don't know. Just like the mass was accumulating here in general. Maybe it moved the nucleus from like more over here to over here or something, because this is a ammonite structure, Africa, that really wrapped around and continued through South America, up through North America, up around through Europe and Asia, and then Australia and Antarctica. Maybe with some of them part of Australia and or Antarctica as part of the portion of the ammonite that is right basically from here to where it meets North America, which was here. So like this segment had something in it that was probably Antarctica. At least, so part of Antarctica is at least part of the shell. Maybe the whole thing was actually right there as part of the ammonite shell that went like this stretch. And yeah, so it was an ammonite, but like an ammonite doesn't have its thing there. Ammonite. Mind you, these are not fossils. Okay. Like it entered in through maybe through here. I need one of these, like, turn the right angle. Has to be like reversed, like that one, just downward. Like the fact that they do this is because it's current flows of materials that are being crystallized, not not like crystals just forming across time in the ammonite shell. It is current flows. The end. Okay, maybe that one. So like this segment is down here, so the nucleus would have been more like up here in the past. This segment. So Earth's nucleus was more, its crust nucleus was more here. But that's not the stable point, so maybe it moved over here. I'm not sure. I'm just kind of spitballing that right now because it seems to explain why they're like the nucleus is just simply not in the proper ammonite position. But it may just be because currents kind of just flowed down here, because they definitely flowed along the northern coastline, and then just we can see this hexagonal down up, down, down, up, down. So they find it essentially it finds ways in, and maybe it does so because there's a large mass that was here. Maybe even like right here. That then just like nova'd until it moved the mass over here enough to be stable. But then that system itself degraded into two halves by the current cutting across it. And this is just what we see it's stable as now. That seems plausible, likely. Okay, back to Juan de Fuca. I feel like I had something I just was gonna say it was why I started recording, but I might have already said it. It's just that there were a couple things I was thinking of. Before I stop recording, maybe I'll just stop. This is long. It's 45 minutes. That's fine. I don't want to make them hours just because I know many of them are. So if I just would feel like it's short if it's not like more than like 10 minutes at least, and then I end up just rambling sometimes. Although usually it's in these underground science videos, I've been just killing it. So like, I don't know. It's hard to find a happy medium or something of all this. Yeah, yeah. I think I just have it. I feel like I'm just like I think I just have explained these things. Like, what more can I say? What more? Every time. It does seem so. There is. I was thinking this. Like, it's almost like if you think of the current as having wheels. Like, it's not just a current. It's a current that's like as it moves, it turns itself over. So like, in essence, it has wheels. And so as it solidifies more and has just more of like a friction while it's turning, it can do like a conveyor belt thing while the current's still flowing. So it probably is just that there are still currents flowing to a degree, especially here as the Earth kind of stabilizes, that is still pulling the Juan de Fuca plate because it overlaid it and then it started to turn the current. It pulled this small enough sheet to be pulled underneath it that was just fractured. It broke and it pulled it under enough to like create the Juan de Fuca plate as we see it and not have it be like going along this way, but really with an inward motion and a fast one, like significant amount of motion. I think that's what it's referring to here. 15 millimeters a year. I'm not sure if the direction, like this arrow, I'm trying to think, like, if this arrow, then there should be like a counter current kind of pulling it underneath it like that. Although maybe it is really here. This current turning like this way, pulling this plate in the opposite direction this way, but because there's resistance, it's kind of just bending, folding like more, kind of rolling in and not quite going just like straight in, but with a degree of a roll to it. Let's see. Juan de Fuca plate rotation. Let's see if there's any like technical conversation around its rotation. Present day pole of rotation. Subduction rates as measured normal to the predicted. Okay, let's just do this. Maybe not. Maybe. Oh my god. Okay, here we go. Resist. Analysis of the magnetic anomalies of the Juan de Fuca plate system allows instantaneous poles of rotation relative to the Pacific plate to be calculated from 7 million to present. By combining these with global solutions for Pacific America and absolute relative to hotspot motions, a plate motion sequence can be constructed. This sequence shows that both absolute motions and motions relative to America are characterized by slower velocities, where younger and more buoyant materials enter the convergence zone, or when the Earth expansion process was slowing down, and there's less force behind these things happening. Okay. The resistance provided by the youngest portion of the Juan de Fuca plate apparently resulted in its detachment at 4 million years as the independent explorer plate. This is the northern part of the Juan de Fuca plate. In relation to the hotspot framework, this plate almost immediately began to rotate clockwise around a pole close to itself, such that its translational movement into the mantle virtually ceased. After 4 million, the remainder of the Juan de Fuca plate adjusted its motion in response to the fact that the youngest material entering the subduction zone was now to the south. Differences in seismicity and recent uplift between northern and southern Vancouver Island may reflect a distinction in tectonic style between the normal subduction of the Juan de Fuca plate to the south and a complex underplating occurring as the explorer plate is overridden by the continent. The history of the explorer plate may exemplify the conditions under which the self-driving forces of small subducting plates are overcome by the influence of larger adjacent plates. Okay. The recent rapid migration of the absolute pole of rotation of the Juan de Fuca plate towards the plate suggests that it too may be nearing this condition. Juan de Fuca plate is one of the last continuing remnants of the Farallon plate, which converged with the western margin of North America over the last 150 million years. The collision of the Pacific Farallon ridge with the American plate between 25 and 30 million led to the independence of the Juan de Fuca plate at about 20 million years ago. Let me read that again. The collision of the Pacific Farallon ridge around between 25 and 30 million. The American plate led to the independence. So this is after Australia was breaking away. Well, this is more so when this current again, where they're just confusing things, honestly. The current cuts across and overlays this current. So it's really not part of me to say that. It's just it's not anyone's fault. It's just our current state of understanding where when something is said, it confuses things at times. At times like this collision of the Pacific Farallon Ridge with the American Plate. It's really not. It was more so that the this current just overlaid it. It's really not at all what they that. It's totally different. A current. This one overlaid that one because it bounced off over into it. Maybe it just vibrated in a totality as the Earth expanded. Like it was one main current, but then when it kind of the Earth started to expand, it more so like vibrated the current to create this ripple effect, making it distinctly after the supernova, which was 66 million years. That's probably it. It's probably more so that than just like a continuous the whole time current because of the date. Progressively diminished as the bounding southern triple junction has migrated northward. Provided C4 spreading and plate motions along the Fuca plate region since 2000 or 10 MA. In general, a ridge and spreading changes are characterized by a reduction in spreading rate and clockwise ridge and plate motion. Okay, so if there's like a plate here, and it's being pulled into this, I think it would rotate by being like pulled this way. Not just straight into it, but because it's really okay. Let's keep going. Let's find some actual data. Maybe I'll just scroll down real quick at least and look at the pictures. Pictures are useful. Spreading rate decreased to pole. Spreading difference gives angular rotation. Yeah. Yeah. Yep. Yeah. Okay. I feel like that's pretty well explained then. Essentially, the current's going under, making this structure where it merges with the other current that flowed out under this way again, creating a balance to a like nova center, truly creating like its ring structure that matches it energetically, like a mantle granifier equivalent for Mount Grenard. Let me just pull up Mount Grenard real quick, just to like show it. Here's the technical papers map. Granifier, that's what I'm talking about. It's not quite the same, but it's still like reminiscent enough. It's crazy that it connects into, seemingly, into Flemish Cap. Maybe I should Google that. Farallon plates. Flemish Cap. Let's see what's a okay. This one does look interesting. I'll just do that real quick. I mean, it makes sense though, because it essentially, the current, let's go back to that Farallon plate thing. The current, like, gets underneath of North America and produces like a a negative to the positive to balance it out, basically, and to balance out this structure of all these novas occurring. The energy down there shapes itself in that way, seemingly. But then, like, it physically extends at points to the point where it's like, oh, I can get out the other side of the continent over here, and it like upwells, and it seems to have like even done it in like a spiraling manner. It's hard to say. Like, that really looks like it's spiraled here. This structure, like, with the combined with it like seemingly upwelling from a depth. Looks almost like a screw that comes up and beep, goes into Flemish Cap some reason. Alright then. Till next time. Peace out.